have some incredible breaking news for you.
The Giant's Causeway on the coast of Northern Ireland is one of the UK's outstanding natural features.
Right, I believe we have some footage that has been taken on a mobile phone.
For 5,000 years, something has been hiding inside a sealed stone chamber beneath one of Ireland's oldest monuments. When Irish archaeologists cracked it open by accident, the site was seized immediately. But something strange happened. Someone leaked the footage. Someone who knew the truth and desperately needed the world to see it too. And what that footage showed about what has been living inside that hill left scientists horrified. The strange footage. It started like something that had escaped out of a horror movie. Suddenly, faster than anyone could process, an 18-ton slab of rock rotated open on its own. No rumbling, no warning, it just moved. It looked as if something invisible and monstrous had pushed it from the other side with tremendous force. The rotation split open a gap in a wall that experts had sworn for over a century was completely solid. Then the smell escaped. It crept out slowly at first, thin and strange, slipping through the gap before anyone could even react. And it was warm, not the cold, suffocating dampness that pours out of any sealed underground space shut for centuries. This was heat, the kind that only comes from something that has been generating warmth inside a sealed space for a very, very long time. Just 23 seconds later, something insane happened. The stone suddenly rotated back. It sealed itself shut and left absolutely no trace that it had ever moved. That is exactly what Kieran Doyle watched happen on his camera screen. Doyle is a 38-year-old structural engineer from Limerick who has spent his entire working life understanding precisely how stone, steel, and mass behave under load and exactly what forces are required to make heavy objects move. So when Doyle watched that footage again and saw an 18-ton slab rotate on a central vertical axis without producing a single sound, the part of his brain built by 20 years of engineering experience did not wonder whether it was real. It told him, with cold and absolute certainty, that achieving that rotation in raw, unworked stone 5,000 years ago was something that should have been completely impossible. And that certainty frightened him far more than any supernatural explanation would have. Doyle had not even intended to be there that morning. His girlfriend had read about the ancient cairns at Loughcrew in County Meath in a travel piece and wanted to visit over a long weekend. So Doyle threw his camera kit in the car and drove out to a site he had visited once as a teenager. He set his tripod up inside the main passage chamber of Cairn T, the largest and most elaborately carved of the lettered cairns archaeologists had catalogued across the Loughcrew hills, aimed his lens at the entrance, and started shooting how the low autumn light fell across the old curbstones. Doyle was deep in his exposure settings when the wall behind him came alive. Now, ask yourself this. If that stone had opened on any other morning, on any day when no camera happened to be rolling inside that chamber, would anyone ever have known? How many times had it opened before, in the dead of night, or in the gray hours before any visitor arrived, with nobody there to see it, and nothing there to record it? Because here is the thing that the researchers could not get out of their heads once they started pulling at this thread. Cairn T has been standing for over 5,000 years, older than Stonehenge and older than the Great Pyramid at Giza by more than 600 years. And in all that time, not one survey, not one excavation, not one radar sweep had ever found any evidence of what was hiding behind that wall. Ground-penetrating radar had been run across that exact section of the cairn as recently as 2019 and had returned nothing unusual, which means one of two things, and both of them are deeply disturbing. Either every single survey conducted at this site across 150 years of archaeological scrutiny had somehow missed a 19-meter passage and a hidden chamber through a collective failure so staggering it almost breaks the mind to accept. Or whatever is behind that wall has a way of staying hidden when it wants to. But on the very morning that Doyle visited, for reasons that no astronomical or solar model connected to this site can explain, it decided to stop hiding. When the clip hit the internet the following evening and exploded to nearly 4 million views overnight, one of the people who watched it was a woman who had spent 20 years of her life studying the exact wall it came from. She watched it once, felt something cold move through her, and immediately reached for her car keys. The Archaeologist and the Wall That Should Be Solid. Dr. Aoife Sheridan had given 20 years of her professional life to the megalithic sites of the Boyne Valley, and she had given more of those years to Loughcrew specifically than to any other site on Earth. She had led 3 separate excavation programs there, handled its decorated stones with her own hands, catalogued its carved passage art piece by piece, and personally overseen radiocarbon dating on bone deposits pulled from inside the chambers. Sheridan knew every stone in Cairn T the way most people know the layout of their own kitchen, which is exactly why watching that clip at 11:30 on a Wednesday night hit her the way it did. Because she knew with the bone-deep certainty of someone who had spent 2 decades at that site that what Doyle's camera had captured was not supposed to be possible. Sheridan called her colleague, told him to meet her at the site at 6 in the morning, and did not sleep. She arrived before everyone else and walked straight to that rear chamber wall the way you walk towards something you are afraid of but cannot stay away from. Sheridan pressed her palm flat against the cold stone. It was solid, immovable, and unchanged, exactly as every measurement and every survey had always described it. Standing there in the gray November morning with her hand flat against that wall, Sheridan pulled her ground-penetrating radar unit out of the car and began scanning. Ground-penetrating radar works by firing signal pulses down through the Earth and reading how those pulses bounce back, building a precise picture of whatever lies beneath the surface without anyone having to break the ground open. The results came back in under 4 minutes, but Sheridan ran it a second time because she needed to be sure, suspecting the decorated curbstones nearby might have interfered with the signal. The second pass threw back the exact same image, and what that image showed tore 150 years of archaeological certainty straight off its foundations. Behind that wall, in a space that every previous survey had confidently recorded as solid glacial till and bedrock, there was a passage that was 19 meters long, 1.4 meters wide, and 2 meters tall. And before you picture some rough natural fissure in the rock, understand what those dimensions actually mean. A corridor 1.4 meters wide and 2 meters tall is a space a full-grown adult can walk through upright without ducking, and it had been sitting behind a wall that the finest archaeological minds in Ireland had studied for generations and declared completely impenetrable. What made it so unsettling was the history stacked behind that failure. Loughcrew had been under professional scrutiny for over 150 years, and an aggressive antiquarian named Eugene Conwell had physically smashed his way into multiple cairns at this site in 1863 and 1864, crowbarring his way through ancient stone and dragging out decorated slabs and human remains with no hesitation whatsoever. If a passage of that size had been crouching behind that wall in 1863, Conwell would have ripped straight into it without a second thought. Yet his published records mention nothing of the kind. Generation after generation of researchers had returned to Loughcrew after him with increasingly powerful equipment, and not one of them, across all of those decades and all of those surveys, had ever caught so much as a whisper of what Sheridan's radar was now screaming back at her. To make it more disturbing, ground-penetrating radar had been dragged across this exact section of the cairn as recently as 2019, just 5 years before Doyle's footage surfaced, using equipment considered state-of-the-art at the time, and that survey had returned nothing unusual. So ask yourself the question the team could not stop asking. How does a 19-meter passage and a hidden chamber escape detection across 150 years of professional archaeological scrutiny, including a high-resolution radar sweep conducted 5 years ago? Either the failure was so total, so consistent, and so widespread across so many independent programs that it defies any rational statistical explanation. Or the passage was not there in 2019, and something put it there afterward. Neither of the two available options offered the team anything resembling comfort. On top of all of that, buried inside the radar data was one more detail that nobody could stop turning over in their minds. The hidden passage measured 1.4 meters wide and 2 meters tall, which are almost exactly the same interior dimensions as the known main passage of Cairn T, sitting directly above it. This was not a rough tunnel scraped through dirt, but a finished corridor built to the same precise proportional standard as the 5,000-year-old monument constructed on top of it, as though whoever designed the hidden passage and whoever built Cairn T were reading from the exact same set of plans. Sheridan sat down on the grass outside and stayed quiet for a long time, because her radar had found a passage in a room, but could not reach inside that room and show her what was in there. Answering that question meant bringing in equipment that had never been pointed at a site like this before and a scientist willing to carry it there, and Sheridan already knew exactly who to call. The geophysicist and the chamber. Dr. Ronan Mac Giola Criost was a geophysicist at University College Dublin who had spent his career producing full three-dimensional images of whatever lay buried inside ancient earthworks. Sheridan called him the same afternoon she ran her radar, and 2 days later he arrived at Loughcrew hauling a second-generation seismic tomography rig, a piece of hardware so powerful and so specialized that it had never once been deployed at an Irish megalithic site before that morning. This is equipment built for hunting fault lines and mapping mineral formations buried far underground, and the fact that it was now sitting in the car park of a 5,000-year-old cairn in County Meath told you everything you needed to know about how far beyond the boundaries of conventional archaeology this investigation had already traveled. Mac Giola Criost needed just 1 hour to complete his initial scan, but he spent the next 3 hours running it again and again and again, and that repetition is not a minor detail to gloss over. Scientists do not burn through 3 additional passes of an expensive, exhausting scan out of idle professional caution. They do it when the results sitting in front of them are so far outside the boundaries of anything they expected that accepting the data as accurate feels less believable than blaming the equipment. He ran that scan 4 times in total, and every single pass hammered back the exact same image, unchanged, unambiguous, and utterly impossible to explain away. The chamber at the end of that passage measured 6.4 meters across. Its ceiling was domed, its floor was perfectly flat, and right there, before the team had even begun to absorb the scale of what they were looking at, the findings took a turn that moved them out of the realm of the extraordinary and into something that had no comfortable name in any branch of conventional science. Whoever built that room had not simply gouged a cavity underground and walked away. They had constructed a finished interior space, smoothed its walls until they were clean and even, shaped its ceiling into a deliberate dome, and then either sealed it themselves or were sealed inside it by someone else. But why does dressed stone matter so much? Because there is no logical reason on Earth to pour that level of labor and intention into finishing the inner surfaces of a chamber that will be permanently sealed underground and never seen again, unless something was expected to be inside it that would experience being there. You do not smooth walls that will never be touched. You do not shape a ceiling for a room with no occupant. That chamber was built to hold something, built with care and deliberate craft, and then hidden inside a hill beneath a monument that the world had been walking across for 5,000 years without ever knowing it was there. At the center of that flat floor crouched a single stone basin. Stone basins do occasionally appear in Irish passage tombs, with Newgrange and Noath each containing examples, and the standard archaeological interpretation is that they held cremated human remains during ritual use of the monuments. So, under normal circumstances, finding one in a newly discovered chamber would be a significant but ultimately manageable discovery. But these were not normal basins. They measured 2.1 meters across and 1.4 meters deep, making it by a devastating and uncontested margin the largest stone basin ever recorded at any megalithic site on the entire island of Ireland. Beyond its staggering size, researchers studying Irish passage tombs have proposed that these basins were not simply containers for remains, but were also engineered as acoustic instruments, with their bowl shape specifically designed to amplify and concentrate sound produced inside the chamber and transform the room itself into a resonating vessel during ritual use. Sound produced in that space would not simply bounce around and fade. It would stack and multiply and press against those smooth walls with a physical force that anyone standing inside would feel vibrating in their bones and behind their eyes long before their ears had even registered it as sound. That chamber was an instrument, engineered underground, sealed inside a hill, and hidden from the world for 5,000 years. Even so, the basin was not the detail that stopped Macchiola Criost mid-sentence when he was describing his findings to the team. Because the thermal imaging had not been run yet, and when it was going to change the entire shape of this story. The heat, 31 degrees in a sealed stone hill. Dr. Cleodna Ní Fáileáin arrived at the end of the first week, and if you had described her assignment to anyone outside that research team, it would have sounded like one of the more unremarkable tasks on the entire investigation. As a thermal analysis specialist from Trinity College Dublin, she was there to sweep thermal cameras across the monument, map how heat moved through the ancient stone, and flag anything unusual pushing into the structure. She pointed her thermal camera at the basin, and what blazed back at her on that screen made her stop breathing for a moment. The temperature was 31 degrees Celsius, burning steadily at the dead center of the basin and radiating outward from that single central point in perfectly even rings spreading toward the chamber walls. Outside on that November morning, the air was sitting at 6 degrees, and the bedrock surrounding the chamber at that depth was reading approximately 8 degrees, which is precisely what normal Irish ground temperature looks like in late autumn. But the basin, sealed inside cold stone inside a hill where every surrounding surface was freezing, was sitting at 31 degrees and radiating that heat outward like something alive and deliberate at its center. Ní Fáileáin grabbed a second thermal camera from the geophysics kit and attacked the chamber from 4 completely different angles. Every single reading came back the same: 31 degrees, constant and unwavering, with those same perfectly even rings spreading outward without a single deviation. For those rings to be that clean and that circular, the source had to be sitting at a precise central point and holding its output completely steady. Geothermal features anywhere in the geological record for this part of Ireland could have explained it, but none exist. Underground water systems near enough to the chamber, running warm enough to push ambient readings that high, could have also explained it, but none exist anywhere near that site. Every explanation the team reached for dissolved the moment it made contact with the actual geology of that region, and what they were left staring at was a heat source burning steadily inside a sealed stone chamber, with no external energy supply that any member of that team could locate, identify, or explain. What the surrounding rock revealed about how long this had been happening hit the team hardest of all. When a heat source sits inside rock, the rock gradually warms until it fully adjusts, reaching what scientists call thermal equilibrium, a state where no temperature gradient exists between one layer of rock and the next. The rock surrounding that chamber had reached full and total equilibrium, meaning every layer of stone had completely and uniformly adjusted to the warmth over an enormous stretch of time. Working backward through the known thermal properties of the limestone and glacial till in that specific geological, Ní Fáileáin wrote in her field notes that it had been burning for what she could only describe as an extremely long time, and the physics of that hillside suggest she was being conservative. Then she added one final observation to her field log without a single word of explanation following it. In forensic science, 31 degrees Celsius carries a very specific and very grim meaning. It is the precise temperature at which the surface of a human body stabilizes immediately after death, before it begins its slow drop toward the temperature of the surrounding environment. Forensic pathologists call it the plateau phase, and it is the exact reading you get from a thermometer pressed against the skin of someone who has just stopped being alive. The basin inside that sealed underground chamber was sitting at exactly that temperature, and it had been doing so for longer than any living person could account for. But as disturbing as all of that sounded, the seismographic sensors had been running through the previous night, and what they had captured in the dark was something that made 31 degrees feel like the least frightening thing the team had found so far. The rhythm. 9 hours of something breathing. On the third night, the seismographic sensors bolted along the outer walls of the passage picked up a low frequency, sitting completely below the threshold of human hearing, the kind of signal that travels invisibly through solid rock and only registers on equipment sensitive enough to catch it. Now, a low-frequency vibration in old stone is not by itself alarming, and any geologist would tell you that ancient structures produce subtle vibrations all the time as the ground around them shifts and settles. But what this vibration did next was the thing that made every member of that team go quiet very quickly. Exactly 5.1 seconds after the first pulse, an identical vibration drove through the stone at the same frequency and the same strength. Then again 5.1 seconds after that, and again, holding that precise interval without drifting by a single fraction of a second across 9 continuous and completely unbroken hours. Here is what a 5.1 second breathing cycle actually means inside a living human body, because this is the moment where the ground shifts beneath you. One breath every 5.1 seconds works out to approximately 11.7 breaths per minute, and a healthy adult at rest breathes between 12 and 20 times per minute. 11.7 sits at the very bottom of that range, deep in the territory the body only enters during the slowest and deepest stages of sleep, when a person is completely unaware of the world around them and every voluntary system has gone quiet. The rhythm grinding through the ancient stone of Cairn T on that third night was not in the range of geological oscillation or any mechanical process the team could identify. It was sitting, with a precision nobody could argue their way out of, exactly in the range of a sleeping body. When the signal was converted to an audible frequency and played back through speakers, a junior researcher said it out loud before he could stop himself. He said it sounded like breathing, slow, deep, and resting. The senior researchers did not write that description into their formal documentation, but none of them told him he was wrong. That silence landed on the team like a physical weight that none of them were able to put down afterward. Research into infrasound, which is sound sitting below the 20 Hz threshold of human hearing, has produced findings that make the location of the signal viscerally uncomfortable. Frequencies between 18 and 19 Hz have been demonstrated in controlled laboratory conditions to produce intense feelings of dread and a powerful, persistent perception that something unseen is present in the room with you and watching you. Some researchers have argued that megalithic passage tombs were deliberately engineered to generate infrasound during ritual use, specifically to force that sensation of invisible presence into anyone standing inside them. If the rhythm at Cairn T was producing infrasound at those frequencies, nobody standing in that passage would have heard a sound. They would have felt it pressing behind their eyes and deep in their chest as a sourceless and suffocating certainty that something was there with them in the dark, breathing slow and completely aware of them. Beyond that, the timing carried its own deeply unsettling message. The rhythm was completely absent during daylight hours. It appeared after dark and stopped dead at dawn, burning through the full darkness of a November night and going instantly silent the moment the sun came up. By the end of the second week, the Office of Public Works had sent a representative, and the National Monument Service descended within 24 hours. Sheridan later described the meetings that followed as the most suffocating professional experience of her entire career. The cairn was declared structurally unstable, access was locked down, and the monitoring equipment was hauled away. But before the last piece of equipment left that site, Nephi Lane swung her thermal camera toward the basin one final time and what appeared on that screen was the reason she drove back to Dublin that afternoon without saying a single word to anyone from the oversight team. The shadow, the candle, and the door built from below. In her thermal data from the previous day, Nifau Lane had noticed a small patch of slightly cooler temperature, roughly the size of a dinner plate, crouching inside the steady field of warmth at the northern edge of the basin. She had logged it as a likely calibration artifact, a spot where the stone was perhaps marginally thicker and therefore fractionally slower to conduct the heat outward. But on the final scan, that patch was gone from the northern edge of the basin and was sitting on the southern edge now, as though it had simply picked itself up and moved while nobody was watching. Nifau Lane ran the scan 3 more times, and the shadow held its new position every single time. She placed the recordings from 5 days earlier side by side with what she was seeing now, and the movement was clear, unambiguous, and sitting entirely outside every principle of thermal physics she could bring to bear on it. In thermal imaging, a heat anomaly does not relocate by itself, and that is not a simplification, but a hard and absolute physical law. A thermal reading shows the position of whatever is generating the differential temperature, so for the reading to show that anomaly somewhere different, the object producing it must have physically moved itself there. Something inside a sealed stone chamber that nothing had entered and nothing had left had shifted its position between one scan and the next. And based on the distance covered across 5 days, it was moving at approximately 42 centimeters per day with no urgency and no apparent destination. Nifau Lane simply packed her equipment, walked to her car, and drove back to Dublin without speaking to a single member of the oversight team. She has not made one public statement about her findings since that site was locked down, and given what those findings showed, that silence is perhaps the most eloquent thing she could possibly have said. Meanwhile, Sheridan had submitted a complete written account of everything the team had uncovered to the Royal Irish Academy 3 weeks after the shutdown. The Academy sent back an acknowledgement of receipt and nothing else. No official body has offered any explanation for any of what that team found. Rather than accept that silence, Sheridan hunted down 3 journalists, one in Dublin, one in London, and one in New York, pressed the same encrypted file into each of their hands containing the full radar imagery, the complete seismic recordings, and the thermal scan data from the final day on site, and told each of them the same thing. She was not asking them to publish it. She was only asking them to protect it and make sure the people who had moved so fast to bury this story could not finish the job. As for Kieran Doyle, he deleted his public profiles on 2 social media platforms within the next 2 months, but not before giving one interview recorded in a private location. And 2 things he said in that interview needs to be heard in full. According to Doyle, when that passage cracked open and the warmth rolled through the gap toward him, it was dry and steady, like the slow breath of something that had been sitting in the dark for an extraordinarily long time, waiting for exactly that moment. And then there was the candle, left at the entrance to the outer passage, 3 full chambers away, around 2 separate corners with 0 line of sight to the moving stone, snuffed out at the precise moment the slab rotated open with no draft, no disturbance, and no identifiable cause, then blazing back to life the moment the stone sealed shut again 23 seconds later. Doyle said that exactly once and never spoke of it again, because he understood how unbelievable it would sound. The hidden passage behind the rear wall of Cairn T was not constructed by human hands. The imaging data confirmed it. The walls are formed from the same continuous, unbroken bedrock as the surrounding hill, with no construction joints, no placed stones, and no evidence of cutting or excavation anywhere along its 19-meter length. That corridor was already there long before Cairn T was raised above it. Geologists have established that the primary chamber was built partially around a natural cave system predating the monument. These builders were not selecting hilltops at random. They were hunting locations where something already existed underground and building directly on top with full awareness of what was beneath their feet. They found that passage, built their monument above it, and engineered an 18-ton stone door on a pivot mechanism of extraordinary precision to access whatever was already waiting below. Was that door built to let people in, or to make certain whatever was inside could never come out? The warmth is still burning at 31 degrees. The rhythm is still moving through that stone. The shadow has kept moving through the silence and the dark, on 3 separate hard drives in 3 separate cities. Everything this team recorded sits locked in encrypted files, waiting for the moment someone decides the world has the right to know what is warm and breathing and moving inside that hill. And the stone door is still there, sealed and patient, waiting for whatever morning it decides to open again.